It's March, Irish Heritage Month in America. Since 1991, American presidents of both parties and numerous acts of Congress in both houses have declared March as Irish American Heritage Month. The early presidential proclamations have always concluded with the president, quote, calling upon all Americans to celebrate the achievements and contributions of Irish Americans to our nation with appropriate ceremonies, activities, and programs, unquote. Now, sadly, too often that call falls upon deaf ears when it comes to the media and to our educational institutions who do such a commendable job of honoring other heritages during their respective months, but they seem to ignore celebrating the contributions of Irish Americans. So, I've made that my job for the rest of this month. It's true. Even we jarred Catholics who came over here to dodge England's tyranny and starvation deserve some recognition. After all, it was the Irishmen who were thrown off their farms and came to America with little skills and even less money, where they dug coal, built railroads in police cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. See, Irishmen were thought to be pretty good recruits for police service because they had a very clear sense of justice after the way they'd been treated first by the English and then later right in America. Barney McGinskin was the first Irish-born policeman in America. He was hired by the Boston Police Department in 1851 against the protests of City Marshal Francis Tukey. There are a lot of Irish immigrants living in Boston, but they were largely considered to be lazy and dishonest drunks, prostitutes, and bums. Tukey told the Boston Pilot, a highly respected newspaper in its day, that the job should have gone to an American. The controversy lasted almost 3 years before, again according to the Pilot, Mr. McGinskin was discharged from the Boston police for no other reason than that he's Catholic, born in Ireland. But the attitudes were starting to turn. By 1862, Boston was hosting one of the first St. Patrick's Day parades in America. More closer to home, we have, in South Bend, Indiana, the Fighting Irish. According to writer Brendan O'Shaughnessy, the university's nickname can be traced back to 1919, when Eamon de Valera visited Notre Dame during his American fundraising tour and was welcomed as a hero. A former math teacher, de Valera had been part of the Easter Rising riots. 3 years earlier, on Easter Sunday, he joined a group of rebels who were determined to liberate Ireland from Great Britain. About 3,000 patriots were supposed to show up. Only about 800 made it, and since most military-aged men were off fighting the Germans, those who did show up were young boys, old men, and women. When these people came together, there was so much dissension among them as to what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it that the operation had to be postponed a day. That's an Irish trait, I suppose. You sit a few of them down together and pretty soon they'll find something to disagree about. Usually the argument isn't intended to prove an idea as blatantly wrong so much as to simply find something to talk about. Anyway. Back in Dublin, the rebels finally agreed on a battle plan and broke into two groups. They were all armed with a variety of classic firearms and agricultural implements. First, they stormed and captured the post office in Dublin. Then they invaded a brewery, a biscuit factory, a lunatic asylum, and other targets of questionable military value. But it was enough to cause a stir. Looting and panic broke out across the city. The end, when it came, was swift. A lone British gunboat sailed into port and started firing shells at the rebel strongholds. Fires broke out around the city and the rebels were killed or forced into the open. At the end of the week, 4,000 people had been arrested and more than 400 killed, including 134 soldiers and policemen. De Valera was among those arrested and sentenced to death. But before the sentence was carried out, and bowing to tensions in Ireland, he was given amnesty, subsequently elected to the British Parliament, and then later arrested again, this time for treason. He escaped and slipped off to America to try and avoid recapture. Barnstorming America in an effort to garner support for an independent and unified Ireland, de Valera was welcomed as a hero at Notre Dame. Accounts in Scholastic, a student publication, indicate that his visit tilted campus opinion in favor of the Fighting Irish moniker, though not completely. De Valera planted a tree of liberty on campus as a memorial of his visit, only to have it uprooted a week later and thrown into one of the campus lakes by a student who was apparently of Unionist persuasion. That's one story anyway. Actually, no one really knows for sure how Notre Dame became universally linked with the Irish. All we have is conjecture. But that's the Irish way, isn't it? Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. The university has a valid claim to the nickname because the brigade's beloved chaplain was Father William Corby, who later became the third president of Notre Dame. The first use of the nickname Fighting Irish for Notre Dame sports teams may have been in 1909, when legend says that a player's speech at the halftime of a football game against Michigan inspired a furious comeback. He reportedly yelled at his teammates with names like Dolan, Kelley, Glenn, and Ryan. "What's the matter with you guys? You're all Irish and you're fighting like a bunch of, A reporter outside the locker room overheard the remark, and by the next day, headlines across the country attributed Notre Dame's win to the Fighting Irishmen. According to historian and author Murray Sperber, the most widely accepted explanation of how the nickname settled on Notre Dame sports teams is more gradual, but still dramatic. During the 1910s and 20s, stereotypes and ethnic slurs were openly expressed against immigrants, especially Catholics and the Irish. The press often referred to Notre Dame teams as the Catholics, or worse, the Papists or Dirty Irish, because the school was largely populated by ethnic Catholic immigrants, most of them Irish. This was also the Knute Rockne era, when the Notre Dame football team was first put the small private school on the national map. Now, Rockne may have been Norwegian, but he had an Irish flair for storytelling and drama. A natural salesman, he hired student press agents to tell the team's story. Some of them began using the Fighting Irish as a nickname to characterize the underdog tenacity of his teams. They found a way to turn the derisive taunt with this suggestion of drunken brawling into an expression of triumph. Some students came to cherish the nickname. By owning the label, they transformed it into a symbol of pride. In the 1960s, the same process had been repeated for the leprechaun, which had traditionally been a derogatory English caricature of the Irish. Today, of course, it's the team mascot. That seems to be another Irish trait. As long as everybody else is laughing, you may as well join in. A little-known event occurring in 1924 may have inadvertently contributed to the Fighting Irish lore. In his recent book, Timothy Egan describes how Notre Dame students violently clashed with the anti-Catholic Ku Klux Klan in that year. A weekend of riots drove the Klan out of South Bend and helped bring an end to the rising power in Indiana at a time when the state's governor was among its members. It was the Catholic Church who set March 17th aside to honor Ireland's patron saint. Excuse me. There's a few things you need to know about that. First of all, St. Patrick was born in Great Britain, not Ireland, to wealthy parents near the end of the 4th century. He's thought to have died on March 17th around 460 AD. When he was 16, Patrick kidnapped by a group of Irish raiders who were attacking his family estate. They took him to Ireland, where he spent 6 years in captivity, working as a shepherd, outdoors and usually alone. It was during those lonely days and nights that Patrick first began to dream of converting the Irish people to Christianity. Patrick escaped after 6 years of captivity. According to his writing, a voice, which he believed to be God, told him it was time to leave Ireland. Patrick walked to the Irish coast and was able to find passage aboard a freighter to make his way home. He was dumped off the nearest port, dirty and broke. Sometime later, he began religious training, a course of study that lasted more than 15 years. He was sent back to Ireland with a dual mission: to minister to Christians already living in Ireland and to begin to convert the Irish. Interestingly, this mission contradicts the widely held notion that Patrick introduced Christianity to Ireland. Familiar with the Irish language and culture, Patrick chose to incorporate traditional rituals into his lessons of Christianity. Instead of starting with something as difficult to comprehend as the incarnation of Jesus, for example, he used bonfires to celebrate Easter, since the Irish were used to honoring their gods with fire. He also superimposed the sun, a powerful Irish symbol, into the Christian cross to create what is now called the Celtic cross, so that veneration of the symbol would seem more natural to the Irish. My favorite example of St. Patrick's remarkable teaching was his reported use of the three-leaf clover, known as the shamrock, to explain the Holy Trinity. But this may very well be another of those wonderful Irish tales. Although there was a small number of Christians on the island when Patrick arrived, most of them were pagans, practicing a nature-based religion. The Irish culture centered around a rich tradition of oral legend and myth. Remember that even the ancient Irish never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Patrick's life probably became exaggerated over the centuries. Patrick was never canonized by the church as an honest-to-goodness miracle-making saint. Not that he isn't deserving, it's just a consequence of having been affirmed a virtuous servant of God before church had any official guidelines for declaring sainthood. After becoming a priest and helping to spread Christianity throughout Ireland, Patrick was likely proclaimed a saint by popular approval. And finally, what of this three-leafed clover, which by legend was used to help us understand how the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are three in one? There's no written record associating St. Patrick with a shamrock until 1726. An Irish cleric with a passion for botany wrote of the shamrock, and I quote, "This plant is worn by the people in their hats upon the 17th day of March yearly, which is called St. Patrick's Day, it being a current tradition that by this three-leafed grass he embolically set forth to them the mystery of the Holy Trinity. However that be, when they wet their shamrock, they often commit excess in liquor, which is not a right keeping of a day to the Lord, error generally leading to debauchery." Unquote. The Reverend Threlkeld's remarks on liquor undoubtedly refer to the custom of toasting St. Patrick's memory with St. Patrick's pot, or more commonly, drowning the shamrock, as it's otherwise known. After Mass on St. Patrick's Day, the traditional custom of the menfolk was to lift the usual fasting restrictions of Lent and head over to the nearest tavern to mark the occasion, which is with as many St. Patrick pots as they considered necessary. The drowning of the shamrock was accompanied by a certain amount of ritual. As one account explains, the drowning of the shamrock by no means implies it was necessary to get drunk in doing so. At the end of the day, the shamrock, which has been worn in the coat or the hat, is removed and put into the final glass of grog or tumbler of punch. And when the health has been drunk or the toast honored, the shamrock should be picked out from the bottom of the glass and thrown over the left shoulder. Even today, Catholicism is as much a nationality as it is a religion in Ireland. It's a matter of public identity more than a private faith, but it's more than just a strong religious culture, which it certainly is. While the number of Catholics has declined about 3% annually over the last few years, 86% of the overwhelmingly Catholic population attend Mass at least once a week. That's more than in any other Christian society in the world. In America, Everybody wants to be Irish on St. Patrick's Day. You don't need a genetic test or a name beginning in O to qualify. Being Irish is an attitude. It's a little charm mixed with wit, congeniality, melancholy, and a slight tendency toward violence. The next time we're together, I'll share with you the tales of one Irish American family, the Kelleys. Till then, my friends, Happy St. Patrick's Day.